Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Look, it is good to stand up in support of the Electoral Administration Amendment Bill number 2. What a lot of people don't realise is about 80% of bills that pass through that House have agreement between the National and the Labor Party. We actually support good legislation, we support strong legislation, and we support common sense legislation, Mr Chair. In fact, the only sort of legislation we don't support is that sort of legislation which strips rights away from workers, and we've seen a little bit of that recently, Mr Speaker, as you're well aware, that strips rights away from workers. And we've debated this long and hard, and I think the vast majority of New Zealanders understand that that is the party for the few, we're the party for the many. And the other sort of legislation we don't support, Mr Speaker, because we do support this, but the other sort of legislation we don't support is the sort of legislation that gives massive tax cuts to those very few at the top. And as an example, we're talking about the 650 New Zealanders. There's about 650 New Zealanders who earn $1 million or more. They have received a tax cut of around about $1,000 a week or more. Now, if you're on the median wage in Napier, you've got less than $5. Now, that is the sort of legislation that Labor does not support, because it's not fair, it's not equitable, and it's not what ordinary New Zealanders, not what everyday New Zealanders, in fact, it's not what the vast majority of New Zealanders actually voted for. So that is not the sort of legislation we would support. But I also want to, Mr Woodhouse brought up an interesting fact also, Mr Speaker. Michael Woodhouse started speaking about mana. Now, it sounds like the rhetoric we get from the New Zealand cricket team when they talk about moral victories. There was a moral victory in mana. John Key stood up there and said, coming second has never felt so good. Well, he's going to come second again in about 12 months. I hope he feels the same way there as well. Because I can tell you, Mr Speaker, on this side we know there's a winner and there's a loser. There is not a moral victory. So enjoy your moral victory. You're going to have a lot more moral victories, but on this side, all we're concerned about is real victories. Chris Whāpoi won. Hekia Parata came runner-up again. And no, she does. That's right. She doesn't do runner-up, but she does. I don't quite understand that, but it's the sort of gobbledygook that we're used to hearing from that side anyway. John Key was ecstatic at coming second. Well, he's going to be laughing a long time next year, I assure you, Mr Speaker. And I must admit, it was good to hear the contribution from the ACT Party. I think it was a retort that said something about free TV. Chief Whip, I can't remember, how many votes did the ACT candidate get in mana? 0.5%. I think that was about 100 votes. That was about 100 votes. Now, I saw Rodney Hyde, the Honourable Rodney Hyde, in the Coro Club one time when I was heading back to Napier to work hard in the Bay. We're going to take these seats back. And I said to Rodney, where are you headed to? And he said, I'm going down to mana. And I thought to myself, why?
They had 1%.
Yeah. Why is he going down to mana? Is it something to do with local government down there? Is there a local government conference? He was going down to campaign in mana. Why would he? He got 100 votes. Now, I've got to ask, Mr Speaker, this is a man who was against perks. He was a perk buster. How much money did it cost to get Rodney Hyde from Auckland down to mana and back again? It was about $1,000 per vote, I suspect. Not a good use of taxpayers' money. Not a good use of taxpayers' money at all. And I must admit, Paddy from TV3 came up and he stood and said, how much taxpayers' money did it cost to get UMPs out to mana? And I said, well, to tell the truth, it didn't cost taxpayers any money, but it cost me $6 on the train. It cost me $6 on the train. And he goes, oh, well, there goes my story. I said, absolutely, because there was no taxpayer money, because we were on the train out to mana every day, 6 a.m. on the train. And it didn't cost any money because I was down here anyway. I was down here on a Thursday anyway. I just decided to go out and help out a mate in mana, because that's what we do in the Labor Party. 6 a.m. we're normally at the gym or going for a run. That Thursday I thought I'd go and help out a mate. So I went and waved some signs. It cost me $6 and it was out of my own pocket. So mana, a moral victory for National, a real victory for Labor. A real victory for Labor, and that's what we're concerned about. Now, back to this bill, Mr Speaker. As mentioned, we do support this bill because we support good, common sense legislation. Legislation that makes it easier for all New Zealanders to engage in the voting process. Now, as my colleague, the Honourable Pete Hodgson, mentioned before, This is about making it easier to enrol, about online electoral enrolment. Now that is a good thing. And I'll give you one reason why that's a good thing. Because when I was out door knocking in Mana, there were many people who either were not enrolled or were not living in the house that said they were supposed to be on the roll. Now, what happens is when people are not enrolled, they become disenfranchised from the system. And we all know the stats of people who turned up on enrolment day in a general election wanting to vote but not able to vote. These people wanted to have the say. They'd taken the time once every 3 years, that's all, or if they live in Mana a little bit more often, but once every 3 years they took time out to go and vote and they were told, you're not on the roll. Now that is not right. Apart from the fact that we know it's actually illegal not to be on the roll. It's actually illegal. I mean, it's unlike Australia where it's actually illegal not to vote. Here it's illegal not to be on the roll. So what we have to do is make it easy for people to obey the law and to get on the roll. And if there are any impediments to that, then it's really the role of this Parliament to ensure that those impediments are removed or at least mitigated and made it easy for people to engage. And this is what this bill does. It provides a more efficient way of checking that electors' immigration status legally allows them to be on the electoral roll. And I think anyone that's been to a citizenship ceremony will understand the importance that new immigrants place on voting on this country. For a lot of countries, and the reason a lot of people are here is because they have been denied their fundamental democratic right to vote. But in New Zealand, we think it is a very fundamental right to vote. It is actually, it's in fact, is probably your number one right when you become a New Zealander. That is your right to choose the next government. So we've got to make it easy to do that, Mr. Speaker. I think everyone would agree with that. And in Mana, there were many instances where this wasn't the case. People didn't know, they couldn't check, they didn't have the ability to check. This just helps it, just makes it that much easier, which we're all for. Now, another thing I would like to talk about, which has been alluded to, is electoral finance reform and referendum. Now, the government's initial refusal to provide spending caps on so-called parallel campaigners or third parties was actually a black mark against electoral reforms. Mr Power saw common sense, realised that there needed to be transparency, and so we reached a workable compromise. And thank you very much to Labor colleagues who actually suggested to Mr Power that this would be a good suggestion. He listened, and here we have what we have now. Now, I understand that the new speaking limits on third party is around about $300,000. Now, to a lot of people, $300,000 sounds like a lot of money, but when you hark back to 2005, there was a group, I think the Exclusive Brethren, they spent $1 million. They spent $1 million. Now, they weren't aligned to any political party. In fact, they're not even allowed to vote. They're not even allowed to vote according to their religion, but they spent $1 million. So this brings it right back to $300,000. Now, and actually under citizens-initiated referendum, it's down to $50,000. So we think that's a good idea, because, like I said, you've got to have transparency, and you've got to have accountability. Now, the former electoral administration set up, we basically had three separate bodies, Mr. Speaker. There was the Chief Electoral Officer, and let me tell you a story. I was standing beside one of the blokes on E-Day in Mana. He got a call saying there's a Nash Labor car driving through the electorate. And I was standing beside him and he said, "Where's your car?" I said, "I drove it right through the electorate. It's now sitting in the Parliament car park underneath Parliament House." So we relayed this, and the Chief Electoral Officer said, well, I can't repeat what he said, but I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, he was not happy at all. You've got to use a bit of common sense in this, and the blokes on the other side ignored that common sense test well and truly. And he wasn't very happy about that, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker. They had the Electoral Commission, and there's also the Chief Register of Electors. Now what we've got is a new Electoral Commission, and it conducts elections, it deals with donations, informs the public about electoral matters, it apportions broadcasting time and funding, registers parties and logos, and it maintains the electoral roll. This is a good, common sense piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, and as I've said, Labor supports common sense legislation. Thank you very much.